I kind of want to start by asking you why you decided to write the book on the finances and economics of women's sports, because it's not a particularly sexy topic, and I feel like there's a lot of murkiness around it as well. So hard to figure out like what is true and what is not true.
Well, it started because Neff Walker is my co-author, and I started thinking about women and sports, I want to say about 10, 12 years ago or so. And as I started following more and more women on social media, primarily on Twitter. And then you would listen to their stories about how women tend to be treated in the sports industry. And as I would listen to the stories and read the stories about what women were saying, it occurred to me that a lot of what men were saying to women about women's sports, that women's sports can't draw an audience, that the market is the reason why women don't make as much money. Women aren't sports fans. Women aren't actually very good athletes, that kind of thing. I was like, none of that really is actually true. And so when I finished my textbook in sports economics, which was published in 2018, I reached out to Neff, who's a professor in sport management at University of Massachusetts. And she's done a lot of research in this area. I said, why don't you and I get together? We'll write a book. And what we'll do is we'll list all the things that men say about women's sports, and then we'll explain, and this is why they're wrong. This is why none of this is the way you think it is. And so that's where Slaying the Trolls came from. And it was a somewhat difficult book to write because it's the women's sports was happening while we were writing it. So we'd write something and then something would change and we'd have to rewrite it. And then finally last April, after the NCAA women's tournament, we just submitted it to Innovative Inc. and said, we're not going to touch it anymore. This is it. We've said what we wanted to say. And then since then, I've come up with a number of story ideas that I wish I would have, we could have said that. But you have to stop. Some points you have to stop. You can't just keep revising forever. And so that's where that came from. But one of the big storylines is around the WNBA. I was writing at Forbes about the WNBA. The storyline this is the storyline the NBA has, and they were actually, when I was writing at Forbes, the NBA was actually insisting to reporters when they covered the WNBA, because the NBA is a major co-owner of the WNBA. They were insisting that we want you to note in the stories that you write that the WNBA is not profitable. And I said, that's a really weird thing to tell somebody about your business. You would not, if you were to go, let's say, write a story about a restaurant, you would find it really weird if before you publish a story, if the owner of the restaurant said, and I want to make sure you tell your readers this is not a profitable restaurant. I'm losing money on this deal. That's a weird thing to tell your customers. And I think to understand why the NBA is so insistent on this, I think you have to understand NBA history. The NBA began in the 1940s. When it began, it was tremendously small, much smaller than the WNBA. It didn't have any fans. And as it goes through time, it gradually builds up a fan base, as professional team sports leagues do. And it takes decades for this to happen. It gradually builds this fan base. When they get into the late 60s, early 70s, they're discussing a merger with the American Basketball Association. And one of the arguments the NBA made to the US Senate is that we don't do the merger. Right now, the NBA is not profitable. And then they repeated that argument. Early 80s, they wanted a salary cap. Why do you want a salary cap? We're not profitable. When you get into the 90s, they wanted further concessions from labor. Why do you want these? We're not profitable. In 2011, they wanted the NBA players to take a pay cut from 57% of revenue down to 50% of revenue. Why do you want the pay cut? We're not profitable. After they got the pay cut and they got a massive television deal, there was a story at ESPN in 2016 that half of the NBA teams are still not profitable. So the NBA keeps repeating this story about the NBA. Apparently, you can't make money in a business where people are bouncing a ball. It just can't happen. So they keep saying this over and over again. And then when the WNBA comes along, they've repeated that same line. Why aren't the women of the WNBA paid better? Why don't they have charter flights? Why don't they have training facilities? We don't make any money. It's not profitable. And you look at the history of the NBA, you're like, you've been saying that about the NBA forever. So aren't you just repeating the same story that you said about the NBA? Because either that or we have to believe that you just can't make profit in basketball, which seems ridiculous. And the other thing about, the profitability story, actually there's a number of other things, but one of the other things is, one of the things I did in writing the book is I reached out to some accountants and I said, what exactly do you mean by profitability? And the accountants were like, well, that depends on what you want to accomplish. So profitability can mean different things to different people. And one of the accountants, he put it this way to me. He said that he's a professional auditor. So he's auditing financial statements from firms. And he says, what I say in my report is simply the way I write it is the firm has asserted the following. I don't say it's true. I just say that that's what they said. And what I gathered in talking to him is it was his job to assess whether it was legal for them to say that. Can you legally report the numbers that way? Not, is that the only way to report the numbers? Is it legal to do it that way? I don't think people understand that if accounting worked the way people think it is, which is, I think people think that anyone looking at the revenue and cost numbers would come to the same conclusion. If it worked that way, well, then we wouldn't have accountants. We would just have computer programs because you just enter the numbers and it spits out the accounting statement. We don't do it that way. We have accountants who say, well, what do you want? What do you want the numbers to say? And whether or not are you legally allowed to do it that way? And so that's a difference. There's actually a very famous quote from a sports econ book from like 40 years ago, where a baseball executive, because Major League Baseball has done the same thing.
Yes. That's exactly where I was going to go because it feels very similar to what happened until the Atlanta Braves had to open their books as well.
Yes. Yeah. This executive in Major League Baseball told somebody, I can take a $2 million profit, turn into a $4 million loss, and have every accountant agree that I did okay, that's okay for me to do that. It depends on what I want to accomplish. And if I'm negotiating with my workers, I definitely want to show that I'm losing money because it allows me to negotiate better. And so the NBA keeps releasing these statements about the WNBA, and it was before $10 million losses. And then we found out that the revenue, and Bloomberg reported this, in 2019 was 100 million, and it went to 200 million in 4 years during a pandemic, which is a phenomenal rate of growth. And then they released a statement, now losses are 50 million. So your revenue doubled and your losses went up 5 times, but you're not paying the players any more money than you were paying them when you started. How did you do that? What are you spending? What are you just setting the money on fire? What are you doing with this?
David, what do you think that they are spending the money on?
I don't think they're spending the money on anything. I think they're just making up a story. I think it's just a story. I don't believe, no reporter who has reported on this has ever said, I saw the financial statements and I know what they're saying is true. Nobody said that. And so when I was writing at Forbes, I said this, I wrote the article this way. The NBA has asserted that the WNBA is not profitable. And I had an editor at Forbes tell me, I can't write that way. You can't say it that way. It sounds like they're lying. I said, no, I'm actually being factually true. I don't know anything about what they said. I don't see the financial statements. You didn't see them. Nobody else has seen them. I know that they said it. And that's all I'm saying. They said it. They asserted it. And that's all you can say. The New York Times and the New York Post, if they were doing their jobs as reporters, would not say the WNBA isn't profitable. They would say the NBA has asserted this to us. We don't have any evidence that it's true. They haven't shown us any statements that it's true. They don't have any explanation for how it happened. So what are they spending the money on? We don't know. We know they're not spending it on the players. We know they're not spending it on the coaches. Judging by the way the WNBA referees perform in the finals, they don't appear to be spending it on referees. So
you've got the NBA says that they're losing money, but you've got NBA players making almost 60 million a year, right? And so it's possible to make a lot of money as a part of the labor and the NBA still assert that they're not profitable, or any league is asserting that they're not profitable. So my question is, why are WNBA players making $250,000 and which is a massive, and the difference in percentage in terms of the revenue, like you've said before in some of your writing, is 11% versus 50%.
Yeah. WNBA players make 10 or 11%. That's, or less. Actually, probably 9 or 8. It keeps going down because revenue numbers keep going up, and they're not paying the players anymore. The collective bargaining agreement for the WNBA is written so that it really is not the case that their wages rise as revenue rises. There's no percentage clause like there is in the NBA, and so their wages are not rising very dramatically, but revenues are going up very fast, and so the percentage keeps going down. And the reason why it is because in the on the men's side, what happened is the men have collectively bargained these things from a position of strength where they could say to the owners, if we don't reach some sort of agreement, we won't play. And if we don't play, you'll be sad, right? Because the owners of the NBA are not just financially invested in the NBA, they're emotionally invested in the NBA. Owners of the NBA teams are often emotionally invested in their teams, which gives the players some level of bargaining power. I think it's very important that people understand that owning a sports team is not like owning and we say this in the book, it's not like owning a cardboard factory. Nobody owns a cardboard factory because they are rooting for cardboard. A cardboard factory is a business, right? It's a business. I'm only in the business because it makes me money. I'm not in the business because I love cardboard. Okay. You don't own a sports team because you wish to make money. That might be one motivation, but clearly you're doing this because I really, really love basketball. Mark Cuban spent a lot of time at Dallas Mavericks games on the sideline, and he wasn't sitting there going, I'm making so much money tonight. This is going great. If you would have gone to Mark Cuban during a loss and said to him, Mr. Cuban, I realize that we're down by 20, but I want to tell you, concession sales tonight are up 8%. We are killing it here. He would not be a happy person to hear that news. That's not why I'm doing this. I want my team to win. And so the problem the WNBA players have is that there are a few owners who are clearly emotionally invested in their teams. I think Mark Davis with the Aces is one of them. You see him at the games. He clearly is excited. I think the owner of the Liberty are like this. They are clearly invested in what they're doing. But there are other owners that are basically absentee owners. They own teams, but they don't go to the games. They don't show any enthusiasm for the team. They don't seem to care about the team. And to me, if the WNBA players were to do what male athletes are doing in the NBA or Major League Baseball and say, look, I'm going to go on strike if you don't increase my wages, I think there is a possibility that some of the WNBA owners won't care. And I think there's a real possibility that the NBA, which owns a huge percentage of it, they definitely won't care.
Even with Caitlin Clark.
Huh?
Even with Caitlin Clark.
The thing is that Caitlin Clark, we're seeing an increase in revenues. Again, and if it were a cardboard factory, that would be great for them. But the fact of the matter is the league is still relatively small compared to the NBA. So revenue last year was $200 million. It's higher this year. They have a new television deal. It'll be even higher. But let's say we say revenue is $500 million. The NBA itself is over $10 billion. Losing the entire WNBA, yes, I mean it's a financial loss to 30 owners. We got to think there's a lot of entities that own that $500 million in revenue. So individual owners are not really losing that much money. And it would matter to them if they cared. If they were at the games and they really wanted to see women's basketball succeed, then they would be sad if the women walked off the job. But I think there's a lot of owners that it's like, I don't think you're actually sad if that happened. If you were sad about this and you really cared about growing the league, then you wouldn't be telling anyone that you think it's not profitable. That would never be a story that you would tell. You do that because basically there are a lot of NBA owners, judging by their past behavior, who seem to think that this whole thing is a charity operation, that they did the women a favor. And that they also seem to...
Do you think there's misogyny, implicit misogyny in the ownership of women's basketball?
Yeah, I do. Among a lot of the owners, absolutely. Absolutely, there is. And so, yeah, I think that's very true. And a lot of these men have this attitude that, and you understand, Adam Silver and all the owners inherited an NBA that already went through all the growing pains the WNBA is going through now. They didn't have to experience it. They inherited an NBA that was already an established entity that already had millions of addicted fans who were not going to leave their business. And to them, their attitude is, well, why can't the women just do this? And it's like, what you did took decades to establish that. The NBA has now reached a point where you look at a franchise like the Detroit Pistons, which hasn't won anything in 15 years, and they're still getting thousands of fans to show up to games. And that should make no sense. That if it were an ordinary business and you disappointed your customers for 15 years, your sales are zero. But they're not. Those fans are completely addicted. They can't let it go. Every year they come back with the same hope. It's going to be different this year. No, it's going to be the same, because you have the same owner and you've picked the same crappy players, and they're going to be the same crappy players they were last year. They're not going to, what do you think? They learned how to play basketball in the last 3 months? They're going to do what they did before. And you see this over and over and over again but it takes decades to get the fan base like that. WNBA is getting like that, but right now it's only in year, 28? WNBA is right now where the NBA was in the early 1970s. And you want to understand, NBA early 1970s, attendance, less than 10,000 fans a game. There are no sellouts. It's not on network television. Nobody's following this. And despite that, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1973 made $400,000 a year in actual 73 money. I mean, he got paid $400,000 in 1973 dollars. No WNBA player 50 years later is getting $400,000 in today's money. And if you adjust for inflation, Kareem was getting $2 million a year in a league that had less attendance and less revenue. So what's going on with that? Well, I think you're treating women differently than you treat men. That's what's going on.
Why do you think there's no transparency in what the real numbers are?
Well, the NBA's always been like that. They don't release numbers. They don't like doing that. It's amazing that Forbes has the NBA numbers. But I remember when I first started doing research 25 years ago on the NBA. I remember calling up people in the NBA. They wouldn't tell you anything. We're not going to tell you what's out. This is a true story. So I'm an academic researcher. I have a PhD. I work with other people with PhDs. We try to have sources that are, you imagine us going to the library and getting academic journals. For a long time, this is how people who wrote about the NBA got the salary data. There was a woman named Patricia Bender who lived in Dallas. She would go through every newspaper report and she'd write it down, what it was. And then she had a website called Patricia Bender's Various Stuff. And every academic who wanted to do a story, write an academic article about what NBA players are paid and what tournaments they pay and what's the level of racial discrimination and all sorts of different things. You would see a citation. Where'd you get the salary data? From Patricia Bender's Various Stuff. That's our source. A lady in Dallas, that's your source? Well, the NBA doesn't release it. So Patricia went and got it for her. I don't think anyone ever met Patricia or knew, but she was just a lady in Dallas who went and got it for us. And she had it on her website, and that's where you found it. And if you go to Basketball Reference now and you look up their historical salary data, I think you'll find that one of their sources is Patricia Bender.
Wow.
How do you know the salaries from 1992? Well, Patricia Bender said that's what it was. And that's because the NBA wouldn't tell us. They wouldn't release it. They wouldn't say, what are you paying these players? I'm not telling you. It's a secret. We're not telling you anything. The NBA has always been very secretive. They're a very paranoid group of people. So this is a true story. The NBA, about 20 years ago, there was a story in the NBA, in the New York Times about that NBA referees were racially biased. And it was based on an academic study, a very extensive academic study. And all the academic study said is not that NBA referees are like members of the KKK. It just said that when NBA referees are making decisions, very split-second quick decisions, it appears that in that brief second of time, the white referees seem to call more fouls on the black players, and the black referees call more fouls on the white players. That race seems to make a difference. That was the story. It wasn't that controversial. David Stern went ballistic. He couldn't handle any negative publicity. He goes nuts. He's attacking the New York Times, and he's attacking the writers. Well, academics, when they saw all the attention this got, they were like, oh, well, we're going to replicate that study. So somebody did a Major League Baseball study. Same thing. And they found the same thing. Umpires tended to be biased towards people who were the opposite race. And this was Major League Baseball's response. They didn't say a damn thing. And that story just went poof. Nobody paid any attention. The NBA has always been like that. They're just obsessed with like any kind of negative story. They're worried that you're going to say something bad about them. They bring it on themselves a lot, but they've always been like that.
Well, now we have an opt-out. The WNBA Players Union has decided to opt out of the future CBA. And then obviously that's when we saw the New York Post article come out saying that the WNBA was losing $40 million a year. Like, what do you think happens with this next CBA? And it's my assertion that I think Kathy Inkford as the commissioner cannot be there in order for the players to get a fair deal. What do you think happens? What do you think her role will be in this process?
Well, they're starting at such a low level of pay. So right now they're getting less than 10% of the revenue. So, and the average salary is $130,000. If you were to pay them 50% right now, do we freeze?
I see you.
Okay, you look like you froze for a second there. So if you were right now to give the players 50% of the revenue at 200 million, so just at 200 million, so 50%, the average salary would be about 600,000. So it'd go from 130 to 100 if you got back to where they were in 2023. But now going forward, the television deal is bigger. There's more attendance, so all the revenue is higher. So now you're talking average has got to be somewhere around $1 million a year if you're at 50% or even higher. So it's really hard for me to believe without any way for the players to really strike, and I don't think they have that ability that they can make that threat, that you're going to get the NBA and the WNBA to agree to give the women 50% of the revenue and up that average salary to $1 million. I just don't think they're going to do that. I think what they're going to do is they're going to up the salaries maybe to something like 300,000 on average or 400,000. And they're going to say, look, we increased salaries 300%. Aren't we amazing? And then I and you are going to look at the numbers and say, you're still only paying them like 20% of the revenue. What's up with that? And they're going to say, hey, we're not making any money off this. And they're going to keep this. They've done this playbook for 50 years. It's going to keep going. And even if you didn't have Kathy Engelbert in the deal, you had a different commissioner, that different commissioner is going to behave exactly the same way because that commissioner is not calling the shots. The commissioner is calling the shot is Adam Silver. Adam Silver is being also dictated by NBA owners who don't really like the WNBA. And so it's very hard for them to do anything about that. You have these owners who don't really want this league in existence in the first place.
So you believe that the owners of NBA teams that have a stake in WNBA teams actually want the WNBA to collapse?
I think it's the case that I don't know that they want it to collapse. I don't think they want the NBA doing anything to give it money, or they didn't want it in the first place. There are WNBA owners. This is something that's really bizarre in covering this. This is really weird. Usually when you cover a sports league or talk about a sports league, the owners and the players are on totally different sides of every issue. When you talk to the WNBA and the people who own the teams, the coaches and the players, I have gotten exactly the same story from all three groups. And the story is the NBA is holding us back. The NBA is not doing this right. I've had owners tell me, I want to pay the players more money. They won't let me. We had owners say, we want to give them charters. They won't let us. We've had owners say this. And so it's really weird that the actual owners of the teams are like, we believe that this league is on a very fast trajectory and it's going to be very successful in the next 2 or 3 decades. And we're very happy to be part of this. They're thrilled with it. And then you have that New York Post article, which clearly doesn't come, I don't think the source of that was WNBA owners. I think the source of that was an NBA owner. And it's the NBA telling the New York Post, this thing loses $40 million a year. Why are you saying that? I don't like this. I didn't like it when David Stern started this in 1997, and I don't like it anymore now. And this is another thing that's really odd about the language they use. So you've heard this. The NBA subsidizes the WNBA. That makes no sense. They can't be subsidizing it. They're an owner. Can you imagine the owner of an owner of a business saying that to their employees? I'm not paying you. I'm not investing in you. I'm subsidizing you. No, you're not. This is a business. You own a business. You invest in the business. That's how ownership works. You're the owner. You're not. This isn't a charity you're running. And they use that language to belittle what they're doing, to demean what they're doing. We subsidize them. Without us, they would go out of business. These women should be grateful that we give them anything. And it's like, no, it's a business. You're supposed to be investing in it because you want it to grow, right? That's how business owners are supposed to behave. No, the fact that that language is out there, I think, tells us a lot.
How do you, I guess, factor in the fact that we're now getting Forbes numbers that the New York Liberty are now worth in excess of $100 million as a valuation? I think I saw 200 million that it's worth. When you look at the appetite to own and to invest into women's basketball, it feels like that information alone would be enough for things to change.
Yeah, it's definitely growing. I mean, it's definitely the case that's growing. I mean, you can't buy a WNBA team now for $10 million, if it was the case like 5 or 6 years ago. And so it's definitely growing. We still haven't gotten to the point where WNBA teams are where Major League Soccer teams are, because the Major League Soccer team 5 years ago, an expansion team, was sold for $300 million. WNBA gets higher ratings than Major League Soccer. Now it's much higher ratings, much higher ratings. I mean, Major League Soccer doesn't compare at all to what the WNBA does in terms of ratings. And we're still not getting to a point where where demand for those franchises is escalating like it does for men's sports. Because one of the things that drives demand for men's sports is that you have a large collection of male billionaires who want to own sports teams and a small supply of sports teams. So when the LA Clippers go for sale, I guess that was 10, 12, 14 years ago, whenever that was, and Steve Ballmer goes to buy them, Forbes issues a statement saying, well, the Clippers are not a very good franchise. They don't have a very good fan base. They don't have a very good media deal. That franchise only worth on paper about $600 million. And so, and then Steve Ballmer comes and says, I'll pay $2 billion. And you're like, how do you justify paying $2 billion for a $600 million business? Okay, well, here's the deal. I have $80 billion and I want to be an NBA owner. There's only a handful of these teams that are ever for sale. And I want one now. And that's the only one there. And I don't want anyone else getting this. So my bid is going to be ridiculous. I'm bidding $2 billion because I want it. And he got it for $2 billion.
Isn't this sort of, but you look at, say, how it was in Russia when all the oligarchs did this with women's basketball. They did the dick measuring contest for women's sports. Why is that not happening domestically?
Yeah, that's so weird, isn't it? It's so weird how around the world we see such different behavior. Yeah, the Russians were investing, $1 million in hiring, or $1.5 million in hiring Diana Taurasi. And yet we don't see the WNBA reacting the same way. And it does appear that the oligarchs' attitude was, well, I want to win, and they represent me, and they have to win. So I'm going to get whoever I can to win, because the objective is to win. And we don't see that same behavior among owners. You see it among men's sports. It is certainly the case. If the NFL didn't have a salary cap, Jerry Jones would spend, several $1 billion to build his roster. So the salary cap reins him in. But on the women's side, it appears the salary cap isn't there to rein them in so much as to just say, I don't want to pay the women. So it's a very different, and I don't have a good explanation for why the Russian oligarchs were so not motivated by profit and so fascinated by winning. And the American owners seem to have trouble with this when it comes to women's sports, because it just doesn't seem like the enthusiasm, even though it's increased, it's still not at the same level we're seeing for minor league men's sports. Because, how many minor league football leagues have we had now? And there is no way that is. I don't want to make The Rock angry about this, but I'm sorry, there's no way that's going to work. You're never going to get a huge fan base for spring minor league football. Everyone knows what you're offering them. These are players who couldn't make it in the NFL. And that's it. That's who they are. And everyone who watches it goes, but they're not in the NFL, right? No. Will they ever be in the NFL? No. So what am I looking at here? Minor league football. If they were good, they wouldn't be here. I
have a friend who made hundreds of millions of dollars in the pistachio business and also invested in Hollywood. And he came up to me in May and said, how do I find a way for me in a consortium to own a WNBA team or to get involved in buying women's sports? So it feels like the appetite from those who see it as a business, who maybe don't even care about the game, still feel like there's a lot of value add still left there. There's still depressed prices, right? So why aren't we seeing more leagues be bought by those type of people who actually will invest?
That's a good question. I want to know where they are, because when it comes time for sales, why aren't those people showing up? Because what I want to see happen is I want to see the next WNBA team that's for sale. I want to see someone come in and say, I'm going to put down $500 million, or I'm going to put down $1 billion for that. Because, and then the fact is, in the long run, that's a hugely successful investment. Because if you could go back in time, back to the early 70s, when the NBA was the same age, and the Boston Celtics were selling for $10 million, and you had $10 million, and you could buy the Boston Celtics at that time, you would say, knowing what I know now, definitely buy the Boston Celtics, because that franchise will be worth billions of dollars in 50 years. So you should buy the Boston Celtics. The WNBA owners right now, they should be able to see that the WNBA is on the same trajectory, and therefore, in 30, 40, 50 years, WNBA franchises will be worth billions of dollars. So if they're offering you a franchise and say, $200 million, you can have it, you should go, that's a very good deal. I should take it. What's odd about what I'm seeing, though, is I don't see those offers materializing yet. Now, they might, maybe the next time they will, but they haven't so far. And it should be the case that it should be obvious that if you have the money, then you should be putting in, $200 million bids, $300 million bids for these teams, but it's not happening yet. And I just think the issue is that many men buy men's sports teams because to them, it's not a pistachio business. To them, it's I wish to own this team because I want to be the owner. I want to be on television. I want to do the interviews. I want to pick the players. I want to pick the coach. I want to be that person because I love being the owner of this team. And you can watch, when you watch like Jerry Jones watch a football game, it's clear he's emotionally wrapped up into everything his team is doing. He is feeling everything they're doing. It's not a business to him. It's a passion to him. And there is a few WNBA owners I see the same kind of behavior, but there's a lot of WNBA owners. It's like I don't see you at the games. I don't think you care. To you, it's a pistachio business, and that's not what it should be.
So how do you think Unrivaled factors into this? They just signed a 6-year, $100 million deal with Turner. It feels like that sort of endeavor puts a little bit of pressure on the NBA and WNBA owners that there's a viable alternative if they don't play ball.
Well, for the stars, yeah. I mean, for the big stars, there would be certainly, and of course, the big stars have a lot of sponsorship deals, so they're not going to be poor if the WNBA is not there. As Angel Reese pointed out, the WNBA doesn't pay her bills, doesn't even pay her rent. So from her perspective, this is not that big deal. I think for the rank and file WNBA players, it probably is a big deal. I'm curious to see how Unrivaled works. It's sort of the thing is that when you look at demand for sports, when it's an individual sport, tennis, boxing, mixed martial arts, you can build a fan base very quickly because you and I can develop an emotional attachment to a person very quickly. If you watch the French Open, it doesn't take you very long to pick out a favorite player, and that becomes the player that you pay attention to. But teams aren't like that. Teams are not real entities. And we see this in the history of Major League Baseball and the NFL and the NBA, that when these teams are first established, it took them decades to build a fan base because the fans initially are, I don't know what a Boston Celtic is. I don't know what a Minneapolis Laker is. I don't know what it is I'm looking at here. And if you say, look, you're looking at the players who played in college, you already saw these players. Yeah, but they're on a different team, and I don't know what that is. So I don't know what I'm rooting for. And as time goes by, the history gets established, and then a rooting interest develops, and people become fans. But it takes decades for that to happen. Unrivaled is doing 3-on-3, so it's kind of like not a team exactly. It's not a big team, so the individuals are still there. So I'm curious whether the fan base is going to show up very quickly because clearly it's the individuals now that play center stage. It's not a team anymore. It's just three people. So I wonder how quickly those fan identities are going to form, and you're going to see people zeroing in on specific individuals. So that's going to be the interesting thing. So it's interesting because it's not a one-on-one sport, which you could definitely see one-on-one. If it was Nafisa Collier playing Brianna Stewart, that would get a lot of fans. 3-on-3 makes it more
one-on-one too. It's going to be 3-on-3 and one-on-one.
Well, the one-on-one definitely is what's going to be huge, right? That's the huge thing. But you got to match up the one-on-one so that it's. And this is interesting. One-on-one is going to work better for women than it is for men. One-on-one for men doesn't work at all. There's actually a film you can find on YouTube back in the 70s. They did one-on-one. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar versus Dr. J. Total failure because Dr. J had no chance. Kareem is 6 inches taller. So Kareem just sat there, held up the ball. What are you going to do? I'm going to shoot whenever I feel like it. You can't guard me. And Dr. J's like, you're right. I can't guard. So it was just a pointless contest. It was just Kareem shooting over Dr. J and then blocking Dr. J's shot. So it was kind of pointless. So the players are closer in height. So I think that's going to make it one-on-one more interesting. So
if there's not as much of an appetite from ownership or people in the W and the success and the investment emotionally for it to actually take off, why do you think there's 14 cities and groups that are desperately vying for the next WNBA expansion team?
Well, I'm hoping again that that's what we're going to see going forward is that this is going to happen, that they're going to put up a lot of money and let this league expand. I hope that's going to happen. It hasn't happened in the past. I do think the WNBA has been overly cautious in expanding. The NBA at this point in its history already had 17 teams. The NBA was forced to expand because of the ABA, so that was a difference. But it's clearly the case the WNBA should be expanding much more rapidly. They're very slow in doing this, but there are a lot of cities out there that should have WNBA teams. And the other thing is they should be expanding the rosters beyond 12. There are a lot of women who should be playing professional basketball that are not. We've created a situation right now. You look at the construction of the Minnesota Lynx. 3 of their starters were cut by other WNBA teams. I mean, that's you would never hear that story in the NBA, right? Where you built a championship teams with players that other teams didn't want. Well, one of the reasons why the other teams didn't want them wasn't because they didn't think they were good. It's like, I only have 12 roster spots. I got to make choices here. And there is a tendency in the WNBA to cut younger players because, well, they don't have as much experience. And so you're going to go with a veteran who knows more. And so you see players getting cut very early on in their career because there aren't any roster spots. So it'd be nice if the WNBA would truly, expand this league out to 20 teams, and expand the rosters out to 15 and make it so that instead of having 150 players, you had 300 players. And so it would make the league a much better entity. So hopefully that would happen. You got to find owners that are going to be patient. The teams that lose are probably going to see lower fan bases and less money, and that's okay. You got to be willing to accept that. So you have to be willing to accept that. So
I also think it's you have to be careful about where these WNBA teams are, right? Like, I don't think in a place like Houston, we're seeing Dallas and Atlanta not necessarily like the most viable for attendance and excitement, just because of like how difficult it is to get around in those cities. You got 6-lane freeways, you've got a bunch of other things that you can do with your time. They're huge, sprawling cities. Do you think the WNBA should focus on expanding to smaller places like Portland, Sacramento, Austin, Nashville? Or do you think that expansion into other big cities makes sense?
Well, the NBA history has always been focused on smaller markets, not larger markets. And so, we don't have an NBA team in St. Louis, for instance, which is a bigger market than, let's say, Oklahoma City. The NBA likes it to have the NBA team be the center of the media focus in the town. So they seem to want to have their NBA teams in markets where there is no other story to write about. And the fan base is totally dedicated to that NBA team and not split between other professional teams. So I think my guess is that strategy is still going to be followed by the WNBA. There is some sense in that. There are a lot of markets that are perfectly viable for an NBA team or a WNBA team. They artificially restrain the number of teams so that they can keep markets open. That allows them to get better stadium deals. And the NBA has shown a preference that, given the menu of cities that are viable, they tend to choose the smaller ones rather than larger ones, so the media attention is more focused on them. So I wouldn't be surprised the WNBA follows that same exact path. But there are. I think if you went through a list of cities that could support a WNBA team, it's got to be at least 40, I would guess.
Wow.
I mean, you just listed some, right? Austin, Portland, Sacramento. Well, there's a lot of cities that are Austin, Portland, Sacramento. You could put teams in all sorts of different places. You and I could come up with a list pretty quickly of 20 cities that don't have a WNBA team right now that could support them. So it's a big list. It's a big list. They could expand very rapidly. And there are a lot of, the number of women who play college basketball, the number of men who play college basketball is roughly the same. Every year you could, there are 60 men who get drafted in the NBA every year. Almost all of them land jobs in the NBA. WNBA right now, they draft 36. The first 12 mostly make rosters, and then after that, it's a crapshoot. I don't even know why they have round three. Round three is pointless. I don't know even why they bother with that. They're not making the team. I don't know why they draft them. No one's going to put their third round draft pick on a 12-person roster. So it's pointless.
Do you see a day where the WNBA expands to Europe, where women's basketball is so much bigger than it is in North America?
Well, I think that definitely that's well down the road, but definitely that would be something that they would do as well. Eventually, all this stuff is global, right? The NBA is a global enterprise now. The WNBA would be a global enterprise. The WNBA clearly has to be thinking that way, right? The WNBA has to be thinking they need to start building up a fan base in Europe and in Asia. There clearly is a huge demand for women's basketball in both places. A lot of the women of the WNBA are playing in Asia and Europe now. That's where they went. And so China has a huge demand for women's basketball. They have a big, successful league. And so you want to get to a point where it's global. And sports itself are global. The Dodgers with Ohtani the other day, the report was in the United States, they got about 3 million fans to watch a playoff game with Ohtani. In Japan, there was 15 million fans.
Wow.
Much bigger audience in Japan than there was in the U.S. And you have to understand, the world is shrinking, and because people have access to the same things. So people around the world are following the same sports. I taught a class virtually in Bangkok for a couple of years. The students in Bangkok all knew about NBA teams. They all knew about English Premier League teams. They're all watching those things. So you'd expect that that's where you're going with this. You want to expand internationally.
So it feels like you, in general, are slightly pessimistic about women's salaries becoming in an equitable manner in the near future, at least, especially with this collective bargaining agreement coming to a close. What has to happen in your mind in order for them to have the leverage in order to get at least the percentages that men are getting?
Well, I think one of the big things that has to happen is as the league gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the cost of a strike goes up because now you're talking about dollars that hurt to lose them. And so in 10 years or so, the WNBA will be much bigger. That strike threat will mean something more. I think also I would like to see the women of the WNBA follow the same lead of the women of women's soccer, what they did. They were on social media constantly talking about pay. And that makes a huge difference. You have to talk about the issue. You have to be out in front about this. One of the things that I find, this is something that I found to be very odd, and I've had conversations with other people in the WNBA who've also found this to be very odd, that when I wrote the article at Forbes and I did the estimate, it was literally, I'm just trying to make up the numbers as best I can because I don't have access to them. I said, WNBA revenue is 60 million. You're paying about 12 million. You're paying 25% of revenue to your players. And that was a Forbes story. And when it came out in 2017, 2018, a number of WNBA players saw that. They commented on it. They would go in the media about this. And then we got better revenue numbers. It turns out I was way off. It wasn't 60 million. It was closer to 100 million. And then I came out and I said, hey, it's about 10%. It's not 20%. You're not getting paid 25%. Even after your new collective bargaining agreement that you just had, you're only getting paid 10% and less. I haven't seen very many women in the WNBA say that publicly. It seems like they're not willing to talk about it. I don't know what that strategy is. If you don't talk about it, I don't see where that's going. You have to say something. And I don't know if they think that behind closed doors, the NBA is going to be nice about this. NBA doesn't have a long history of being nice about these things. They don't do that. It was the case that back in the early 80s, under the leadership of Oscar Robertson from the 70s, the NBA got a system set up, the players got a system set up of free agency, where there's no salary cap, there's free agency, player salaries were escalating. They were getting paid 60% of league revenue, and they were doing extremely well. And then the NBA started saying, we're not making a profit. The league is struggling. We're going to go out of business. And the NBA players just kept giving back concession after concession. They agreed to a team payroll cap. They agreed to an individual salary cap, a rookie salary cap, a league-wide salary cap, a luxury tax. And every time the NBA would say, we're losing money, give us another concession. And the NBA gave back everything Oscar Robertson won. And that's the league that the WNBA is negotiating with. I don't see that they're going to suddenly be nice and go, hey, here's 50%. That's not consistent with their history.
I've got fans in my mentions whenever I do anything about the WNBA. I've got a pretty large following, and everybody just repeats the same thing over and over. WNBA is not making money. The WNBA is a charity case. They don't deserve the pay that they're getting. They should just be happy with the numbers that they're getting, et cetera. Nobody cares. Nobody watches, et cetera, et cetera. That really pisses me off. Like, it really makes me upset. Because
that's why we wrote this book just for you.
That's the damage, though, that the NBA is causing.
Mm-hmm. That's what they did.
Creating a narrative that women's sports are not as valuable, not as interesting.
Yes, the NBA did it.
If you had to guess, is the WNBA profitable?
I would think it is. I would guess that it is. Well, you're not paying. They're not paying the players. They're not paying I've talked to coaches. They ain't paying them either. I don't think they're paying the referees. So if they're not making money, tell me what you're spending the money on. I don't know what. I did have an agent tell me years ago when it came to the issue of profitability. And this is that, so when the National Pro Fast Pitch League existed, it was softball. I was told by the commissioner of that league, they were trying to expand. She told me, National Pro Fast Pitch League, to run that team, to pay the players, do all the travel. And they had a bigger schedule than WNBA has. So you think about all the flights they had to book. They said it cost $1 million a year. That's what it costs, $1 million a year. And I said, well, the WNBA claims that they can't make a profit, and they're getting something like, each team is getting $6 million a year at the time or more, and they can't be profitable. You're doing it for $1 million. So what are they spending the money on? I had one agent said, well, one WNBA team, when it came time to choose where to put their offices, they chose the most expensive office rental place in the city because those were the nicest offices. And you're like, what are you spending the money on? Well, you're making really stupid decisions about where to put your home office. Why are you doing that? If you're trying to make money, you don't do things like that. That's not a thing to do. And so, I don't know that they're always spending the money as wisely as they could, but I also take this case, the NBA also, I've had this said to me, well, you say it's $200 million revenue, but the NBA, because they own half of it, they get half off the top, and the other half is used to pay the players. I said, well, that's not how business works. The players created the whole $200 million revenue, so they get a piece of all of it. You can't arbitrarily decide they only get half. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how that works. And so the NBA has put out this narrative. James Dolan, who owned the Liberty, has, I think, been a vocal person who said things like this, that it doesn't make any money and it's a charity and you should be, that's the kind of stuff they say. And so it's disappointing. I think it just comes out of the NBA's playbook that they used for years with their own players, but it's created this legion of trolls who show up and they constantly say things like, the WNBA isn't profitable and the women should be happy. And also nobody watches this, which is ridiculous. 2 million people tuned in to watch the Game 5 of the WNBA finals. They had 18,000 people show up. And I watched that game. It seemed like those fans seemed to be watching. They seemed interested.
I was in the arena, David, and there was not an empty seat in the house. Not an empty seat in the house. It was the most electric, engaged basketball game that I have seen outside of maybe a Final Four game. Yeah. And that includes multiple NBA finals where LeBron and Steph were going at it, heavy hitting.
Yeah.
It was a Barclays Arena where the Nets play, and there was not an empty seat in the building.
And yet the trolls keep telling you the women should be happy getting paid $100,000 when they're attracting that big of an audience. And you know that if it was a men's sports attracting that big of an audience and that level of enthusiasm, there's no way you would pay them. And again, you want to contrast that going back to the 1970s. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar never saw an audience like that. Never. He didn't see that. In the early 70s, he was never getting anything like that. And he was getting paid $400,000 a year.
At what point do you think fans, I guess finally, at what point do you think fans know that this is a ruse, that know that this is a hijinks? They see the television ratings, they see the attendance numbers, they see information from Fanatics in terms of jersey sales. At what point do we say they're like collectively we're being lied to?
Well, when everybody reads my book with Neff, that's what's gonna. No, I don't know, because I've been saying, Neff and I have been saying this stuff for years, and the problem is you have this narrative out there, and it's put forward by men in the sports media who listen to the NBA and they report what the NBA says as if it's verbatim true, and it's very hard to combat that because you're right, you are being lied to, and it's unfortunate that that's what's happening. But the NBA. Professional sports have learned this tactic. They learned it through decades of negotiating with male players, that if you tell people that you're not profitable, you won't have to pay as much money and you'll get more money for yourself. And unfortunately, that they've learned that story. And you want to understand, it's not just that they lie about the player salaries. These are the same owners that go to cities and say, you have to build me an arena and you got to spend billions of dollars to do it. to make so that my team will be competitive for you. You're not doing it for me. You're doing it for your fans. I'm creating jobs for you. It's like, and I once wrote an article at Huffington Post many years ago. I said, it's odd that when poor people ask for money, if somebody is homeless on the street and they ask you for money, it's pretty clear what they're asking. They're saying, if you give me more money, I'll be better off, right? That's what they're saying. But when a rich person asks you for them to get a subsidy for their business, the way they couch it is, you give me $1 billion and you'll be better off. It's like, that's a lie, right? I'm not going to actually be better off. You're going to be better off. I can see that. Oh, no. I'm doing it for you. Oh, no, you're not doing anything for me. You're doing it all for you. And they learn that if they tell that story, a certain percentage of the population will buy it. And that's all they need. They don't need everyone to buy it. They just need some people to buy it. And people are kind of gullible. So they do.
David, this has been awesome. I'm gonna take this and scream it from the highest rooftops. Every WNBA player that I speak to, I'm going to make sure that they know that they are getting hustled. And we appreciate you for not only coming on to the podcast, but doing the research, getting your hands dirty, rolling up your sleeves, and finding out what's true and what's not, because it's very important, not just to the livelihood of these women's, but for the future of women's sports as a whole.
And I want to tell you that I've lost I have no friend in the NBA or WNBA front office at all. I've lost all of them. They won't even talk. No, it's not. They're never my friends. but it is the case that they definitely don't like me.
I'll look forward to that as well.
Yeah, I would hope you do that. Tell the players, get the players to say something. They got to speak up. They got to talk. They have to say, look, we're getting less than 10%. We're getting ripped off. This is bad. You have to fix this. It's not going to happen unless you say it. And you got to go through and just say, these are the numbers. We are a growing business. We are not a charity case. 18,000 fans did not show up at the Salvation Army last Sunday night. That's not what it was. And you got to treat us like we're actually professional athletes and treat us like it's a real thing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Sure thing.
Great stuff, David.
That was fun.